I think we are on the ball here. Launch our show. 11/11/2024. A name that kind of comes up for World War One aficionados of the end of World War One. There's our WordPress.com. As you may notice, normal background here. I had anticipated doing this from Seattle. After all of the little jiggery pokeries of going to Jackson Wheat, co-author's wedding in Shreveport, Louisiana, unfortunately, the weather didn't help at all. So we weren't able even to fly out of Seattle. And so here I am back in Spokane to do our little show. And this is the first following the cataclysmic election that we just had. We'll have some little comments on some context on that in a bit, but we'll at least resume what I had planned, which is, of course, continuing work on the Titans book as we plow through the remaining little critters in the Ornithischian bunch. This one on Lesothosaurus, which Sarfatti and Tay don't quite know what kind it is in there. And that's incidentally the very first one that they don't seem to be able to put a supply on, which means that the baraminologists haven't figured this thing out either. Anyhow, they cite one paper on their groups in a fossil formation, which, quote, might imply, unquote, ironically, a term YECers would normally dismiss as waffle words. Barrett et al. 2016, whose very title, this work here, New Specimens of the Basal Ornithischian Dinosaur, which I'll be putting a link up to in the finished version, has pointed out that the specimens are occurring in a 6 meter stretch of exposure where the accumulation of bones are a few tens of centimeters across. So this is not exactly a catastrophically massive deposit of full skeletons. This is little bits and pieces of stuff, which, because of the systematic material, can be connected up to Lesothosaurus, which, if you have relatively limited data field available, it can be a little bit tricky as to figuring out how to fit in systematically. So none of this is therefore helping the big slosh scenario. Then we're going to be, over the next weeks, we'll be hitting kind of a lull in terms of the technical papers that Sarfatti and Tay are citing, as they cover quite a few taxa generically without any source citation. So we'll be supplying the source material that they neglected to deal with when we finally slide into the tail end of this little relatively truncated chapter. This will be the last of the chapters relating to the dinosaurs, because then they move on to pterodactyls and marine reptiles, where I'm sure they aren't going to be dealing with a hell of a lot of the little fiddly bit details there either. Now, as has been the case for the last alternating episodes, part 2 relates to the exciting world of Casey Luskin's Discovery Institute list of 800 papers, plowing through every bloody single one of them to see how things fit. A new one from Grassler et al. 2022. There's a draft version that I'll be putting a link to. The full text of the thing isn't available, but the stuff at bioRxiv is probably fairly similar to the finished text. Anyway, it's on the NR5A2 factor that contributes to the shift from maternal to embryonic genetic control in mice, and therefore presumably mammals generally. And it's acting as a housekeeping element, which is likely why it ended up on Sarfatti and Tay's list, or the Luskin list, because sign B1 and ALU elements, quote, are major targets of NR5A2, unquote. By that's a quote from the paper, not the Discovery Institute, because they're not putting any quotes or annotations or anything at all in that monstrous list they have. And this could just be a reference as to how many of the components, the retrotransposons, this particular element is able to bind to, because there's so many of them around. Once again, there's no indication in that 2022 paper that there are how many connections are in fact made, or whether they're the majority of the ALUs and B1 sign elements. And interestingly enough, no further papers in the Discovery Institute list regarding NR5A2, which may be because there's a theodicy angle. So I'm going to be putting a paper from 2021 up by Guo that shows that it is overexpressed in pancreatic cancers. So if you're arguing that this little component is a designed element, doesn't it have cancerous afterthoughts as a built-in bug to the design? Are they ever going to think that through? Probably not. Hello, Lisa. I can imagine why you might be depressed. If it's relating to the outcome of the election, I'm going to be having some stuff that will partly depress you more and partly maybe depress a little less, because there's some curious surprises that I've been spotting in what isn't being discussed on this, but we'll get to that in just a moment. Anyway, one other little paper that our DI bunch go after is Julie Wang et al. 2022 on ALUs in primate cortex evolution. Again, it's not an open access paper, but I will be putting up the abstract to it. So, and I would think that the topic really only makes sense if we're evolutionarily related to primates. Well, yeah. Oh, that blue state part is part of the positive signs. Things are going to be rather interesting. So, I was expecting the election to turn out very differently. Oh, I'll be also putting in a link to the new piece that I just did. I wrote it before the election, but it was available at, well, actually, a little different than shenanigans. I'll preface this by saying this current election was fair and square. Trump won the bloody thing fair and square. And I'll explain what all that means and the flip side of why that may not mean quite what the Trumpistas like to think it is. It's all to do with the numbers. Anyway, the post for Faves News, which is the follow-up on that Christian nationalism thing that I had done earlier, just got posted today. So I'll be putting a link up to that in the comments so everyone can deal with it. And anybody who follows me on Twitter has already seen I've posted it and reposted it in various modes. And I put it up on Facebook on my page and that as well for those who follow me from that angle. So anyway, on to the cute little point of the election. I was, as I've expressed to many people, cautiously optimistic that we were going to have a good vote for Harris the following day. In fact, I was running projections in my head. I was thinking that if you had some decline in the Trump vote and all of the Biden vote from 2020 plus a little more, I wouldn't have been at all surprised to see 90 million for Harris and 70 million for Trump. Well, on the Trump side, he gets like 72 million, which is a little bit more than my 70 million, but less than he got in 2020. In other words, there's been a 5% decline in Trump's vote this time versus the other. So how come Harris isn't president? Because she wasn't getting that 90 million. She wasn't getting that 80 million. She was getting the bloody hell 68 point something or other million. In other words, some 20% of the Democratic vote didn't vote this time around. And when you look at that master number compared to what was Biden 2020 and Hillary Clinton in 2016, it's suspiciously similar numbers to Hillary Clinton. And so what I strongly suspect is that big 15 million block of people in the Democratic Party, we now have to call them air quotes Democratic Party, would not vote for a woman. They would vote for a man, Biden, no matter what the consequences, even though it ends up throwing the presidency over to idiot Trump. Now for the terror awaiting us in this. We're still not entirely clear as to whether or not the Democrats have will regain or not regain the House of Representatives, but it looks that the Senate clearly has moved to the Republicans, and that means there's going to be court appointments and cabinet officials and the like. I am presuming that barring unforeseen circumstances, it's likely that the Trump administration will get their major crap that you can see in the Project 2025 stuff right off, and he will be little dictator from day one kind of stuff. So what's that going to have an effect, and what do we need to do about it? What can we do about it? Part one is, if all of the immigration issues and the tariffs that they're looking like they're actually going to put in, a bunch of Nobel laureate economists are expecting that to trigger a depression. Not a recession, it's the D word, depression. Now, I have never experienced that sort of thing. Oh, hello, Purple. Yes, I'm just giving the autopsy for our dismal election and the fact that 20% of the Democratic Party should hang their bloody head in shame for not voting at all. Because I have every reason to think that had all of the people who voted for Biden in 2020 come out as they did in 2020 and just vote for Harris, they would have taken those swing states and the blue wall and all the rest. So this is a terrible judgment on the misogyny in big chunks of the Democratic Party. It is not, however, a sign that the support for Trump is bigger than it was before, because he got less votes this time. He got higher proportion of an awful lot of demographic groups than he did last time, but that was because less people voted. So that's the slight silver lining. So I was just about to try to analyze what the hell might be expected and what we needed to deal with about reacting to stuff. If a depression is being triggered, then that means that people with retirement income that's built and pensions built on the stock market are going to be in terrible trouble. That the agricultural sector is probably going to be hit like a ton of bricks, along with the construction industry. That we can expect a weird circumstance of a depression with an inflationary spiral. That's another little cute little bit to wonder about what's going on. Ironically, if they are successful in gutting so many of the federal programs that actually help people, Musk is wanting to cut $2 trillion in discretionary spending, which happens to be considerably more than the entire discretionary budget, which is like 1.4 trillion. That what that means is that this is actually going to be hurting people in the red states, because as those who look into these numbers are well aware, the productive blue states have been subsidizing the red states for a long time through all of these aid programs. So it would mean technically cutting aid and support to red states and having more capital and money flowing around in the blue states. Fascinating to think about. Now, if you run yeah, well, again, that's a proportionality of stuff. We don't know that breakdown of what the hell was that 15 million that didn't vote. How many of those were younger people? How many of those were misogynistic idiots who were older than 30? We need to have a much greater breakdown. And the thing that really puzzles me or annoys me about the media is there has been absolutely no mention in any of the stuff that I've seen. It wasn't the case with PBS or CBS at the night of the election. It hasn't been in the additional coverage. When you look up internet material about what the voting groups were, none of them give the total votes. They will go into monotonous detail about the percentage increase or decrease, but not the total. And so I'm looking at that total and wanting to see much more breakdown of what the heck was going on. Plus, people, for example, there was just somebody interviewed on 60 Minutes tonight about a Hispanic voter who decided to go for Trump because of the concerns over the economy. And at no point did they ask her what sources did she rely on to think that any Trump policy could possibly have an impact on that, given the fact that the Trump people have not made anything. None of the GOP have given the slightest indication they understand why there was inflation or what to do about it. Trump's is supposed to wave his little magic wand. Anyhow, if on the upside, assuming we still have free elections, assuming that that we don't go into complete authoritarian meltdown over the next 4 years, if we have reset the clock so that 2024 is a lot like 1928 election. Well, 1929 had the stock market crash. 1930, it got even worse. 31, 32, happy days are here again. You had the vice presidential candidate, Franklin Roosevelt, on the 1920 Democratic ticket that had failed in the campaign against Harding, ending up president of the United States. Who knows? Maybe Tim Walz might end up as president of the United States at this time. At any rate, which means to say that a hell of a lot of stuff can happen over the course of the next 4 years, and not all of it will be all that necessarily helpful for Trump. He seems to be riding high on the top of the world. Well, so did Herbert Hoover in 1928. So did Richard Nixon in his landslide victory of 1972. And before his term was even done, he was out of office. Nothing quite undermines your support if you put all of your policies in and they prove catastrophically bad. And if he's having a horrifyingly bad impact on farmers and the construction industry and people up and down the yin yang, even though the rich people in there will be doing up gangbusters, we'll have to be keeping an eye out for whether or not graft and illegalities are going on. I would say everything is flux. So the main point is that everybody hunker down in relation to debt load and the like, because if the economy crashes, well, an interesting detail is, can Trump survive an economic depression? He's weathered recession eras, although how much money he lost on that is unclear. It looks like he lost about $1 billion because of his own actions in the COVID economic slump. We don't know about his tax returns to know how much money he lost during the 2008 real estate meltdown. But he certainly has never had to interact with a depression economy where not actually making a product could be a big problem for him getting money at all. And so this, ironically, could end up bankrupting the guy in the long term on this. So we're going to find out what's happening on stuff. He is legitimately still, although the Smith Commission and all that's going to be wound down because the God King Emperor can just stop all of that. But it doesn't change the fact that he's a convicted felon. It'll be intriguing to see what happens. For example, if he tries to do a state visit to Canada, convicted felons cannot come into the country. So would they have to give him a special dispensation? There are quite a few nations that have that characteristic. So it's going to be a weird and surreal operation that is going to be upsetting an awful lot of people's worldview on things. But for the moment, yeah, the Trumpistas are riding super duper high. And their great curse may be that they're actually going to get exactly what they asked for. And then we're going to see what the result is. Yes, it's, well, yes, on top of which you've got the remaining bits, several $100 million of his debt that comes due in 2028. Presumably close to $1 billion is sucked out from the stuff that was due in 2023 and 2024, which he doesn't like to talk about in public. He's very circumspect on this kind of stuff. So I would expect him to try to cheat on his finances, to try to do the same kind of tricks that got him into trouble in New York, where he can't pardon himself on that because that's state, to see what the heck is going on. I think it's a bitter pill that the nation is going to have to do for not all. Some of the Trumpistas will probably go down with the ship. They'll be as extreme as some of the people who were defending Nixon right down to the bitter end. But when you're promising to make America great again, to the wonderful economy that was actually the Obama economy that Trump had, and saying about how well he's going to handle inflation, which is already ameliorated, et cetera, plus all the issues about Ukraine aid and international affairs with this mess, it's going to be a tumultuous few years to deal with. And I am not at all, yes, 37 countries, yes, Trump's felony conviction, unless they give him special dispensations. And a snotty little bully like he will exactly like to do that. But I'd say that yes, you got to hunker down and not look very closely for what cash flow and things you have on stuff, because there's no indication that any of the Trump policies, if they get them all in, can have the effect that they were looking for. They're living in a fantasy world. They've got the Navarro types. It's going to be fascinating to see what absolute mess is going on in terms of like RFK Jr. becoming the health czar and all of that. It's highly likely that the states that have brain functioning leadership will just have to bypass the FDA. You won't have to worry about those NOAA hurricane predictions anymore if they get rid of that, Department of Education and so forth. There's just so many pile up down the road. And when people discover that they're not the Trumpista crowd, or for that matter, the 20% of Democrats who sat this one out, realize that the policies are not helping them, but making Elon Musk richer. It's possible some blocks of those will actually turn on them, and we'll see what happened in the same way that we had that bifurcation from 1928 to 1932. Or not, maybe it's the end of the Republic as we know it. So happy days may or may not be here again. Yeah, that's oh yeah, well, and there's another matter. Yes, as Trump may be edged out, Vance, of course, is a scary little character with the Teal bunch. But remember, these are people who can easily lead into the kind of corruption level that we saw with the Harding administration, with the Teapot Dome, elements of the Grant administration, and all that. These are people that are used to fiddling and cheating and manipulating the law to their effect. And it may come the point where there's still even some of their own Trumpista gang decide they've had enough, just in the same way that Liz Cheney and other people who were supporting Trump both times, 2016 and 2020, finally said enough is enough on here. And nothing is quite a stimulus like having an economic collapse. I have never experienced a depression. I'm too young for that. And so for those youngsters out there who, if they're thinking about bad economic times, what happened during the COVID meltdown or the 2008 Bush element, no, this is going to be way worse, to where people would look back nostalgically on the idea of having only 10% unemployment or 15% unemployment. It's going to be a very interesting mess. And of course, they're going to want to put in this bit where they can fire 50,000 bureaucrats and replace them with partisans, or maybe not replace them at all. Remember, the Trump administration is terrible on that kind of stuff. And that means that if that's the way it's instituted, then that means if they ever do lose power, all of those people can be kicked out by the next administration. So beware what people ask for. Hunker down, be very, very careful. Be careful of your finances. There's some companies, companies like Best Buy, were already in kind of financial dicey situations. Those will probably go bankrupt during Depression. There can be problems with anything, even some of the high-end areas. Remember, a lot of the rich people things of the 1930s, like Duesenbergs and that, didn't survive the crash. Banks went turtle up and all that. Remember, you're too big to fail. Well, they're too big to be bailed out by a Trump administration. So you could have bank failures. There's a mess that's going on here. Yes, the people are complaining about the price of eggs now. Yeah, I have felt that part of the difficulty comes from a lot of people who are so young that they never have known an inflationary cycle as we had under the stagflation of the 1970s. So you have to be my age to have experienced that. And then you've got the ones that are younger, but are still not old enough really to get a grip upon a time when there were interest rates that were varied. Now, the fact of the matter is what can the Fed do if we're still fairly low interest rates? And the best you could do in the case of a big stock market crash and an economic decline is to lower the interest rates to nothing. Well, that's what we had all during that post-2008 period. Are you going to make them negative? What exactly can you do beyond that? And certainly Trump will want to try to politicize these things, and what rubber stamping will be done by the Trumpista Federalist Society court people and all of that. Anyway, once the information gets posted on for the bit for all the technical papers, also take a look at my little post from Spokane Faves and share that around. There's also will be a link in that post to the previous thing that I did on all of that Project 2025 connections and Trump and all of that. And this is basically the potential game plan that people should be familiar with to see just how closely Magic Mike, MAGA Mike Johnson, and Trump, and whoever ends up as the majority leader in the Senate do for policy issues. And if it's anything like what they're asking and planning on doing, buckle down, kids. It's going to be a really murky little time. So I will let everybody on that. If they cut Social Security, I would be homeless too if they were dealing with that on Social Security. And the kinds of reforms that need to be made on eliminating the ceiling on the Social Security tax so that wealthy people pay into that, all of that could extend the viability of Social Security out farther. Is a matter with the fact that some of these things can have an impact in the short term electorally. Remember, there's going to be a midterms in 2016. And if the Trumpistas actually do things that are going to be a mess for Social Security and Medicare, there's going to be an awful lot of people in an awful lot of states that are going to go, what? On that. I mean, how many people that have parents and grandparents and others that would connect directly up to that? So the potential bright side is that a disastrous thing could have a kind of shock therapy for big blocks of the Trumpista vote that won't work in any other way, because they could be smug and thinking, oh my, the economics are terrible because the price of eggs have gone up slightly. Well, let's see what happens when things actually do get terrible, and what can be done about that. Maybe this will be the horrifying impetus needed for a genuine progressive movement and a probable realignment, because that 20% of the Democratic Party that wouldn't vote for Harris is still going to be sitting there like an albatross. But I'll want to see much greater breakdown as to what the turnout was for young people and the like for the next few years. So yes, well, or assuming that they have any elections at all, or suspend them, Trump declaring martial law. I mean, we're all in completely unprecedented thing. The idea that a major political party, the party of Abraham Lincoln, could have elected a convicted felon, a person of such manifestly terrible character. One of the fascinating things about this interview of this one on 60 Minutes that I mentioned is that she thought that Mr. Trump feels for her, that she understands common people. No, he says he does that. He does say that, but he isn't. He's a sociopath. And the fact that so many people are able to kind of tunnel vision that, just wait till you see what the price of eggs might be, or for that matter, the price of agriculture would be if you suddenly gutted the mechanisms for inexpensively picking crops. And the same thing with the impact that Hispanics have, illegal ones, under the radar in the construction industry. And so you're going to build tons and tons of houses, like Mr. Trump has some experience in doing that. The only thing he could do was build apartment blocks where they were discriminating against Black people. He got big fines on that back in the 1970s. So anyway, yes, I never thought the leopards. Yes. Well, they're going to find out what the leopard eating the face party actually is when they are the one facing it. And it could be a bumpy little time in here. So it's either the end of our republic or not. And take some heart in the fact that Trump did not get as big a vote. 5% of even the 2020 Trumpistas were going, yeah, probably not. And how many of those may peel away in future, and what is going on with the idiots in that 20%? That's going to be something for us to deal with in the next few years. So keep trying to move further right. Well, yeah, and of course, what people regard as right and left is been a quibble. The problem is that the Trumpistas, the former Republican Party, have moved so far to the right that everything looks left from their point of view. I think Attila the Hun would look that way to them. And if you've got policies, normally you would think that it's not easy to crash the economy into a depression by a single term. But if you have a pile up of bad policies, that's what Benjamin Harrison did, another Republican, in the old days, high tariff, protectionist economy, and free silver inflationary policy to boot. He managed to tank the only other president who has a non-consecutive. Oh, and if we get out of this mess in one piece, we need to have a law that absolutely rules out that convicted felons can ever be president of the United States. Duh. Okay. So, I'm oscillating between, well, if we want two growth industries in the coming years, it's going to be one, a sticker that says, "Don't blame me, I voted for Harris." And the other one is, the second bumper sticker is, "We warned you, didn't we? You wouldn't listen, would you?" Long for a bumper sticker, but what can I say? So let me put up to remind people, and whether or not it's going to be the situation where people in the coming years will be able to still help out here on the Patreon or not. I don't know. I cannot say. I thank everybody that's been able to stick with me, right? We want to make sure, ideally, that financial catastrophe here in the United States doesn't spread farther in the 19th century. Well, Mitch McConnell certainly is the evil genius that stacked a bunch of court appointments in there. And ironically, he and his corporate friendly wife, who was Secretary of Transportation, I think, before Buttigieg came on the scene, may very well have their portfolio blown to smithereens in a Trump administration. So that may be a little Pyrrhic victory on seeing who doesn't manage to make it through a disaster. Yeah, I still have a button in the shape. I didn't vote for Reagan. Well, I come from a different perspective. I did vote for Reagan. I was a Reagan era Republican for a very long time. And I had qualms about their Central American policy. There were a whole bunch of things that I complained about at the time. But finally, it reached the stage where I could see how far to the right the Republican Party was moving in the Bush years, and to the point of where I, in good conscience, could vote for Bill Clinton in '92 to move the Democratic Party more towards the center. And I haven't been able to vote for a Republican since, because they become increasingly crazy train. So let me put up my advert for Rocks Were There. And that will be our little bit for the show for the evening. So I've been trying to maintain, a bunch of people I know from both friends and family have been not at all pleased with the way things are turning out. And I was absolutely gobsmacked when I saw how low the vote was for Harris. And I'm going, are you nuts? Well, that's kind of what we're seeing. The Paralog series that I began at a time of personal stress, I must say, has been a little safeguard for my head space in the time right now, and I'm assuming for the rest of it, as I'm busy working on the third book in the series. Because I know that if I get really stressed out about the events that we're seeing in the news, or will be seeing in the news come January on, I can at least escape to the 1870s and the world of Phileas Fogg and Aouda and their flying machines and all the other things that they're doing back in that adventure story that I can kind of compartmentalize. And of course, we are working on volume 2 of The Rocks Were There, which will be coming out presumably next year as well. And we'll see what's going on here. This might tell you. Yeah, well, I want to be really clear. Trump needs to, by his actions, end up destroying the Republican Party. And I think there's a good reason to think, given the demographics of that the last Republican in Congress might very well be Marjorie Taylor Greene, because I think her stupid little district will be voting her out. You could see some little aged little troll in that spot all the way down to the end of things, in the same way Jesse Helms always got reelected and all the rest. There's going to be these little fossil remnants of them down the road, but it deserves a party that absolutely deserves extinction. Whether or not we're going to finally see, I made a comment on it in on Twitter, and that what will it be the case that there will be a reforms conservative party that's got halfway's brains to them? Lincoln Party might be a name for that. And then whether or not they can jettison that weird bunch of that 20% idiots and have a new progressive party that would be, I don't know, I call it the Trek Party after Star Trek, that anybody that would be able to see in the future and would feel at home in the Star Trek universe, isn't that a party that we could all take some pride in and deal with, because it's about progress and intelligence and science and doing stuff that makes sense. I think in a case in what we've got, we've elected a Democrat governor here to replace Inslee in Washington State. We've got, we're acting as a bastion of progressive issues on healthcare and the like, compared to Nutball, Idaho next door. See the posting that I'll be putting up on that issue regarding that Christian nationalism matter. That there will be these zones that are happening all over the place. And it's we're not out of the woods, but it's going to take courage and decency and resolute action and smarts to work us along here. So anyway, Tim Walz for president 2028. Yes, I have no problem with that. I think he has potentially a tremendous impact, and as being a man, he would be able to at least get some of that 20% idiots who didn't vote for Harris. Oh, well, I tell you, we will not be a fully adult nation until we reach the stage when, just as we can have female captains on starships in the Trek universe, that we don't give a second eye bat to the idea of a skilled woman being president of the United States. And everybody that couldn't vote for her this time around in the air quotes Democratic Party should be marked in the book of iniquity as not being on the side of reason and progress, kids. So anyway, and on that far from cheery note, the rampaging wooden penguins are a minor problem we can see. We've got new kids on the block, and they are salivating, ready to tear down things that are valuable. And it's going to be a bumpy ride, kids. So everybody stay super safe. Try to have a comfortable and pleasant Thanksgiving and holiday Christmas, or Hanukkah or Kwanzaa or whatever else you feel like dealing with, until we hit the shit hitting fan mode come January 20th. Well, we will be continue. We will be here next week, and there will be more Evolution Hour, hopefully. Okay. Oh, I will be ending the stream here. We've got our plugs and commercials and all the rest in. And indigestion will be a feature for an awful lot of us for quite a while.